Ma'am, step away from the vault immediately. Your profile has been flagged as suspicious. The words didn't echo. They sliced clean through the polished silence of the private banking floor, sharp enough to turn heads from behind frosted glass offices and marble counters. Danielle Brooks didn't move. Not when the whispering started. Not when two security officers shifted their weight closer. Not even when the director himself stepped forward, adjusting his cufflinks like authority lived in the fabric. She stood there in a simple navy blouse, dark jeans, and low heels. No designer logos, no entourage, no signal to the room that she controlled more capital than most of the people staring at her combined. And that was exactly why they misread her. The air changed fast. What had been quiet luxury a second ago now felt charged, like something invisible had been pulled tight across the room. A junior banker behind the counter glanced at her screen, then back at Danielle, then quickly looked away as if eye contact might pull her into whatever this was becoming. I'm going to need you to step back, the director said again, slower this time, voice lowered but heavier, like he was trying to make the moment official. His name tag read Richard Coleman. Mid-50s. Polished. Certain. The kind of man who had never been questioned in rooms like this. Danielle finally shifted her gaze, not to him, but past him, taking in the room, the people, the posture of judgment that had formed in seconds. She had seen this before. Different city, different building, same look. The assumption didn't shout. It never had to. It settled into the space like fact. Suspicious, not because of what she did, but because of how she existed in a place like this. One of the security officers cleared his throat, stepping just close enough to suggest action without taking it. Ma'am, he said, more cautious now. We can resolve this quickly if you cooperate. Cooperate. The word hung there, thin and loaded. Danielle exhaled slowly, steady, controlled. No rush. No panic. Just time bending around her stillness. She turned her head slightly, meeting Richard's eyes for the first time. He expected resistance. Maybe embarrassment. Maybe explanation. What he got instead was calm. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. Run my name, she said, voice even, almost quiet, but it didn't need volume. It carried anyway. The junior banker froze. Richard didn't respond right away. Something about the way she said it disrupted the script he thought he was in. Around them, the room leaned in without moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the soft hum of the building seemed to pause. Danielle didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, before a single key was pressed, before a single system responded, something had already begun to shift, and nobody in that room realized yet that they had just flagged the one person who could shut all of it down. The silence did not break all at once. It fractured, first with a glance, then with a cursor blinking on a screen that suddenly felt too bright for the moment it was about to reveal. The junior banker hesitated, her fingers hovering just above the keyboard, as if touching it might trigger something irreversible. Richard noticed. His jaw tightened slightly. Go ahead, he said, but there was a shift in his tone now, less command, more insistence. Danielle did not move. She did not look at the screen. She did not need to. She had already seen this moment play out in a dozen different forms over the years. Different rooms, different faces. Same hesitation when truth started pressing against assumption. The banker typed slowly, carefully, as though each letter had weight. Danielle. The system responded instantly, but the reaction did not. Her eyes widened first, then flicked to Richard, then back to the screen as if it might change if she looked away. It did not. The air tightened again, but this time it was not accusation. It was confusion. Sir, she said quietly, her voice almost catching, this account is not flagged for review. Richard stepped closer, his presence suddenly more urgent. Then why was it restricted? He asked, sharper now. The banker swallowed. It was not restricted, she said. It was manually flagged. That word landed heavier than the first accusation ever had. Manually. It did not belong to a system. It belonged to a person, a decision, a choice. Danielle's gaze shifted slightly, not surprised, not offended, just confirmed. Around them, the whispers changed direction. They were no longer about her. They were about him. One of the security officers took a small step back, subtle but unmistakable. The other adjusted his stance, no longer reaching, no longer ready to act. The tension that had once pointed at Danielle was beginning to turn. Richard felt it. Of course he did. Men like him always did when control started slipping through their fingers in rooms where they had never lost it before. "Check the access logs," he said quickly, almost cutting over the moment before it could settle. "There must be a discrepancy." The banker nodded, pulling up another screen. Her hands moved faster now, not hesitant, but precise, like she was chasing something she had not expected to find. Danielle finally shifted her weight slightly, just enough to remind the room she had been standing there the entire time, unshaken, watching the structure of assumption begin to collapse under its own weight. She turned her head just enough to meet Richard's eyes again. Still calm, still controlled. "You should look carefully," she said, her voice steady, almost conversational, "because whatever you find next is not going to be a system error." The banker froze again, her screen reflecting in her eyes. "Sir," she began, softer this time, uncertain in a way that did not belong in a place like this. The flag, it originated from a director-level authorization. The room did not move. It held its breath. And in that suspended second, before anyone spoke, before anyone reacted, the truth stood there fully formed, waiting to be acknowledged, and for the first time since this started, Danielle did not look like someone being questioned. She looked like someone who already knew exactly how this would end. The word hung in the air like a verdict that had not yet been spoken out loud. Director-level authorization. No one moved, but everything shifted. The junior banker stared at the screen as if it might retract itself, as if the system might correct the truth it had just exposed. It did not. It stayed there, clear, precise, undeniable. Richard's expression did not collapse all at once. It tightened, subtle, controlled. The kind of reaction practiced over years of holding authority in rooms where doubt rarely touched him. "That does not mean anything," he said, but his voice had lost its earlier certainty. It was thinner now, stretched over something he could not quite contain. Danielle watched him without interruption, her posture unchanged, her presence steady like something anchored deeper than the room itself. She had seen this moment before too. The exact second when confidence starts negotiating with reality. One of the security officers shifted again, this time stepping fully back, creating space where tension had once stood. The other followed, their earlier readiness dissolving into quiet observation. They were no longer part of the action. They were witnesses now. The banker cleared her throat, pulling up another layer of data. "There is more," she said carefully, her voice measured but no longer neutral. "The flag was placed 12 minutes ago. That detail landed harder than the first. Not an old error. Not a system glitch. Recent. Intentional. Timed." Danielle's eyes flickered for the first time, not with surprise, but with recognition. 12 minutes. She knew exactly when she had walked in. Exactly when the room had decided who she was before asking who she might be. Richard's gaze dropped to the screen, then lifted again quickly, as if refusing to let it define the narrative. "We follow protocol here," he said, almost reflexively. "If something appears unusual, we act." Danielle tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but sharper now, carrying a precision that cut cleaner than volume ever could. "Protocol does not write itself," she said. "People do." The room absorbed that. Every word, every implication. The whispers that had once circled her now circled him, quiet but undeniable. A man near the glass office lowered his phone, no longer pretending to check messages. A woman seated by the lounge leaned forward slightly, her attention fixed, her expression no longer passive. The environment had changed sides. The banker hesitated again, then spoke, this time directly to Richard. "The authorization code traces back to your credentials." There it was. Not implied, not suggested. Stated. Clear enough that no one in the room needed clarification. Richard did not respond immediately. For the first time since he stepped into the situation, silence belonged to him. Danielle took a single step forward, not aggressive, not confrontational, just enough to close the distance that had once been used to push her back. Her voice remained even, controlled, but now it carried something else. Finality. "You did not flag a transaction," she said. "You flagged a person." The words settled into the space like truth that had been waiting to be spoken long before this moment. No one interrupted. No one corrected her, because there was nothing left to correct. And as the weight of that realization spread across the room, one thing became unmistakably clear. This was no longer about suspicion. This was about exposure. The room did not recover from the last sentence. It could not. It lingered there, suspended between what had been assumed and what had just been proven. Richard's authority, once effortless, now felt like something he had to hold together manually, piece by piece. He straightened his posture, adjusting his jacket as if structure could be restored through appearance alone. "You are misinterpreting internal procedures," he said, but the words sounded rehearsed, not rooted. Danielle did not respond immediately. She let the silence breathe, let it stretch just long enough for everyone in the room to feel where the balance had shifted. Then she reached into her bag, slow and deliberate, and pulled out her phone. No sudden movements, no performance, just intention. The screen lit up in her hand, casting a soft glow against the tension that had settled over everything. She tapped once, then again, her eyes never leaving Richard. "Carla," she said calmly, her voice carrying clearly across the space. "Initiate full audit protocol. Pull vault access logs, director-level authorizations, and internal flagging records for the last 30 minutes." There was no hesitation on the other end. "Confirmed," a voice replied, crisp and immediate. "Audit protocol is live." The effect was instant, even if nothing visible had changed yet. It was the kind of shift you felt before you saw. Systems moving, records unlocking, truth organizing itself behind the scenes. Richard's expression flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. "You cannot just activate internal audits without clearance," he said, stepping forward, trying to reclaim ground that no longer held. Danielle tilted her head slightly, her voice steady, almost patient. "I already did." The banker's screen refreshed without warning. Lines of data began populating faster now, more detailed, more precise. Timestamps, access codes, authorization trails, each one adding weight to what had already been exposed. The junior banker's breathing changed, shallow and quick, as she scanned the information in front of her. "Sir," she began again, but this time her voice did not carry uncertainty. It carried confirmation. "The system is escalating this to corporate oversight." That word landed differently than anything before it. Corporate, not local, not contained. This was no longer a situation that could be managed within the walls of the branch. This was something bigger, something that reached beyond Richard's control entirely. Around them, the room adjusted again. People were no longer pretending not to watch. They were watching openly now, fully aware that they were witnessing something that was no longer just an incident. It was a turning point. Danielle remained exactly where she was, centered, composed, her presence now undeniable in a way that had nothing to do with appearance. She glanced briefly at the vault door behind the glass, then back to Richard. "You tried to stop access," she said quietly. "But what you actually did was trigger visibility." The words settled with precision. No emotion, just fact. The phone in her hand buzzed once. She did not look at it right away. She did not need to. Because by now, everyone in that room understood something they had not understood 13 minutes ago. This was never about whether she belonged there. It was about what happens when someone who does belong decides to let the system answer for itself. Danielle finally glanced down at her phone, then back up, her expression unchanged. "They are on the line," she said. And just like that, the room stopped feeling like a bank and started feeling like something else entirely. The shift was complete now. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. The phone in Danielle's hand became the center of the room without her ever raising it. "Patch them through," she said calmly, her tone unchanged, as if she had been expecting this moment from the second she stepped inside. A soft click followed, barely audible, but it carried more authority than anything spoken so far. "Danielle, we are connected." Carla's voice came through, clear and steady. "Corporate oversight is live. Legal is listening." That was the moment it landed for everyone. Not as a possibility, not as a threat, as reality. The junior banker straightened instinctively, her posture shifting from uncertainty to protocol. One of the security officers took another step back, now fully disengaged, his presence no longer aligned with enforcement but observation. Even the ambient noise of the bank seemed to lower, as if the building itself understood the weight of what had just been activated. Richard did not speak immediately. He could not. His authority, once unquestioned, now sat under scrutiny he did not control. Danielle turned slightly, not to face him directly, but enough that her voice would carry to both him and the invisible audience now listening beyond the room. At approximately 10:17 a.m., a manual flag was placed on my account under director-level authorization, she said, her words precise, measured, each one placed with intention. No transaction irregularity. No compliance trigger. Just a decision. The junior banker's screen updated again, confirming every word in real time. Timestamps aligned. Authorization logs matched. There was no space left for interpretation. We are seeing that, Carla responded. Continue. Danielle's gaze lifted, scanning the room briefly, acknowledging the witnesses without addressing them. Then back to Richard. That decision resulted in restricted vault access and an immediate escalation to security intervention, she continued, based solely on presence, not behavior. Richard finally stepped forward, his voice returning but thinner now, edged with something unfamiliar. This is being taken out of context, he said, attempting to stabilize the narrative that had already slipped past him. Danielle did not interrupt him. She let him finish. Then she spoke again, just as calm, just as controlled. Context is exactly what we are establishing. The words landed clean. Final. On the other end of the line, another voice entered, deeper, more formal. This is legal counsel. We are documenting everything. Proceed. The effect was immediate. Whatever remained of informal authority in the room dissolved completely. This was no longer internal. This was record. Danielle's phone vibrated softly in her hand, but she did not look down. She did not need confirmation. She could feel the structure shifting around her, piece by piece, aligning with truth instead of assumption. She took a small step forward, closing the last of the distance that had once been used to separate her. Not aggressive, not confrontational, just present. You identified me as suspicious within minutes of my arrival, she said, her voice steady but sharper now, carrying the weight of everything that had unfolded. Before verification, before inquiry, before any actual cause. Richard's silence said more than any response could. Around them, the room held still, not out of tension now, but attention. Focused. Unavoidable. Danielle's eyes met his one last time, not with anger, not with triumph, but with clarity. So now, she said quietly, we are going to finish what you started, just not the way you expected. The room held its breath as if the next word would decide everything. Danielle did not rush it. She never did. Timing, she had learned, was not about speed. It was about control. Carla, she said, her voice steady, confirm ownership structure for this institution. There was no hesitation. Confirmed, Carla replied immediately. Brooks Capital holds a controlling 62% stake. Effective majority authority. The words did not echo. They settled. Heavy. Final. The junior banker's eyes widened again, this time not from confusion, but from realization. One of the security officers shifted his stance entirely, now standing straight, hands behind his back, no longer part of any enforcement, but part of a room that had just realigned itself around truth. Richard's face changed in a way he could not fully control. It was subtle, but visible. The certainty was gone, replaced by calculation. That does not change protocol, he said, trying to anchor himself to something familiar, something procedural. Danielle looked at him, calm, almost curious. It changes everything, she said quietly. The simplicity of it made it heavier. No raised voice. No argument. Just fact. On the line, another voice joined, sharper, unmistakably executive. This is board oversight, the voice said. We are reviewing the incident in real time. That was the moment the structure collapsed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. The banker's screen updated again, now displaying ownership layers, governance rights, executive authority. Danielle's name sat at the top, not as a client, not as a visitor, but as control. Full, documented, unquestionable. The whispers in the room stopped entirely. There was nothing left to speculate. Danielle took a single step forward, closing the final space between herself and the narrative that had been placed on her. Her voice remained even, but now it carried weight that did not need explanation. You question my access, she said, to a vault that operates under a system I control. Richard opened his mouth, but no words came out. Not because he did not have them, but because none of them would hold against what had already been established. Danielle continued, not louder, just clearer. You did not verify. You did not ask. You decided. Each sentence landed like a record being logged, precise and permanent. On the other end, legal counsel spoke again. We are documenting discriminatory application of authority based on non-behavioral indicators. Continue. Danielle nodded slightly, acknowledging the process without breaking her focus. You escalated without cause, she said, her eyes steady on Richard. You restricted access without evidence. And you initiated enforcement based on assumption. The room absorbed every word. No one moved. No one interrupted. Because now, this was not just a conversation. It was a record. Danielle's phone vibrated again. This time she glanced down briefly, then back up, her expression unchanged. Board has full visibility, Carla added. Danielle took a breath, not out of stress, but out of precision, aligning the final pieces before they locked into place. She looked at Richard, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. You called me suspicious, she said softly. In a system where I define the threshold for suspicion, the sentence settled deeper than anything before it. Because it was not just a correction. It was a reversal. And in that moment, the room no longer belonged to the assumptions that started this. It belonged to the truth that ended it. For a moment, no one spoke. Not because they did not have words, but because none of them would carry the weight that had just settled over the room. Danielle did not rush to fill the silence. She let it expand, let it press against every person standing there, until it forced awareness into places that had been comfortable just minutes ago. The vault door behind the glass remained closed, unchanged, but now it felt different. Not restricted, not guarded, just waiting. Waiting for the right authority to acknowledge it. Danielle shifted her gaze briefly toward it, then back to Richard, her expression steady, unreadable, but no longer neutral. It carried something else now. Not emotion, resolution. Carla, she said calmly, revoke all local overrides placed within the last 15 minutes. There was no delay. Confirmed, Carla responded. Overrides are being removed. System returning to baseline authorization. The junior banker's screen flickered again, the flag status disappearing line by line, replaced by clear access indicators. No warnings. No restrictions. Just open permission. The way it should have been from the beginning. The banker exhaled softly, almost without realizing it, as if the system itself had just corrected something deeper than data. One of the security officers straightened further, now fully at ease, his earlier tension replaced with quiet respect. The other glanced briefly toward Danielle, then away, as if acknowledging something he could not quite put into words. Richard remained where he was, but the distance between him and control had grown too wide to bridge. Danielle took one final step forward, stopping just short of him, her presence now undeniable in a way that did not require explanation. Access restored, Carla confirmed. Danielle nodded slightly, then looked at the banker. Open the vault, she said. It was not a demand. It was not a request. It was simply the next step. The banker hesitated for less than a second this time, then moved. Fingers steady. Motion precise. The system responded immediately. A soft mechanical click echoed through the space as the vault unlocked, the sound subtle but definitive. The room did not react with noise. It reacted with stillness. Because everyone understood what that sound meant. Not just access. Correction. Danielle did not move toward the vault right away. Instead, she turned her attention back to Richard, her voice calm, but now carrying the final edge of accountability. You built your decision in less than a minute, she said, and it took the system 13 to undo it. The numbers settled heavily. Measured. Intentional. Richard's silence was no longer control. It was consequence. On the line, the board voice returned, firm and unmistakable. We have completed initial review, it said. Findings will be acted upon immediately. Danielle did not respond to them yet. She kept her focus where it belonged, on the person who had started this. This was not a misunderstanding, she said quietly. This was a choice. The words did not accuse. They defined. Around them, the room remained still, every witness holding onto the moment as it unfolded without interruption. Danielle finally turned toward the vault, her posture unchanged, her pace unhurried. Because now, there was nothing left to prove, only something left to finalize. And everyone in that room knew the same thing at once. Whatever came next was not going to be a correction. It was going to be a consequence. Danielle stepped forward into the vault space without hesitation, her heels making a soft, measured sound against the polished floor, each step deliberate, controlled, final. The door remained open behind her, not as a barrier anymore, but as a statement. Access had never been the issue. Judgment had. Inside, the air felt cooler, quieter, insulated from the tension that had just unfolded outside, but not separate from it. Nothing about this moment was separate. Everything was connected. Danielle paused just inside, her hand resting lightly against one of the secure lockboxes, not to open it, not yet, but to anchor the moment. For a fraction of a second, her expression shifted. Not visible to everyone. Not dramatic, but real. A memory, quiet and sharp, surfaced without permission. She was 24 again, standing in a different bank, smaller, less polished, holding documents she had spent months preparing. Business plans, financial projections, proof. The man across the desk had barely looked at them. "We just do not see a stable profile here," he had said, his voice polite, his decision already made. She remembered the weight of that sentence more than the rejection itself. Not stable, not credible, not enough. The room had felt smaller then. Closed. Final. Danielle blinked once, and the memory dissolved as quickly as it had arrived. Back in the present, the vault stood open. Not closed. Not denied. Open. She turned slightly, looking back through the glass toward the main floor where everyone still stood, still watching, still processing what they had just witnessed. The difference was undeniable. Then and now. Past and present. Assumption and reality. Danielle exhaled slowly, the breath steady, controlled, not emotional, but grounding. She did not need to say anything to the memory. She had already answered it with everything she had built since. Behind her, the quiet hum of the system continued, normal, restored, indifferent to what had just been exposed. Because systems did not carry bias. People did. Danielle turned back toward the lockbox, finally opening it with a smooth, practiced motion. Inside, documents sat neatly arranged, untouched, exactly where they had always been. Order, structure, proof. She did not linger. She closed it just as calmly, the soft click echoing gently in the enclosed space. Outside the vault, no one moved. No one interrupted. Because this was not just a transaction. It was a moment of correction that had extended beyond the physical space. Danielle stepped back toward the entrance, her posture unchanged, her pace steady, carrying nothing visible, but everything understood. As she crossed the threshold, the room seemed to realign again, not around tension, but around clarity. She stopped just short of where she had first been questioned, her eyes lifting to meet Richard one more time. There was no anger there, no satisfaction, just something far more difficult to face. Truth without noise. "You saw a risk," she said quietly. "I saw a pattern." The words settled between them, not as an argument, but as a conclusion. Because what had happened here was not new. It had just been undeniable this time. And in that moment, standing in the same space where she had been labeled suspicious, Danielle Brooks was no longer correcting a mistake. She was closing a cycle that had started long before anyone in that room realized they were part of it. The room did not return to normal. It could not. Something had been exposed too clearly, too completely, to be undone by silence or routine. Danielle stood where the moment had brought her, not in the vault, not outside it, but exactly in between, where decisions had been made and now had to be answered for. The distance between her and Richard was no longer physical. It was structural. On the line, the bored voice returned, firmer now, carrying the weight of conclusion instead of observation. "We have completed our preliminary assessment," it said. "Director Richard Coleman, your access privileges are being reviewed for immediate suspension pending full investigation." The words did not need emphasis. They carried their own finality. Richard blinked once, the reaction small but visible, as if the reality had taken a second longer to reach him than it had everyone else. He straightened again, instinctively, but there was nothing left to hold on to. No policy, no authority, no assumption that could shield him now. Danielle did not move. She did not react outwardly. She simply listened, allowing the process to unfold the way it was meant to. Effective immediately, the voice continued. "You are to step away from all operational control within this branch." The banker lowered her eyes, not out of fear, but respect for the shift that had just been formalized. One of the security officers turned slightly, not toward Danielle this time, but toward Richard, waiting, not to enforce, but to witness compliance. The roles had reversed without a single raised voice. Danielle's phone remained steady in her hand, the connection still open, the system still active. She took a small step forward, not to confront, but to conclude. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried through the entire space without resistance. "This is what accountability looks like," she said. Not a threat, not a declaration, just a statement. Richard looked at her then, fully, for the first time, without the filter of assumption. There was no response he could offer that would change what had already been set in motion. Because this was never about a single moment. It was about a pattern that had finally been interrupted. Around them, the room remained still, but no longer tense. The energy had shifted from conflict to clarity, from reaction to recognition. Danielle turned her head slightly, acknowledging the banker with a brief nod. Not as a superior, not as a correction, but as someone who had witnessed the truth and chosen to follow it. Then she looked back toward the open vault, then the room, then finally the phone in her hand. "Carla," she said calmly, "log this incident under executive review. Full documentation. No internal suppression." "Confirmed," Carla replied instantly. Danielle ended the call with a single tap, the connection closing as cleanly as it had opened. The room remained silent for a moment longer, as if waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did, because everything already had. Danielle adjusted her posture slightly, her presence no longer questioned, no longer tested, just recognized. And as she turned to walk toward the exit, unhurried, composed, one truth remained behind her, settled into the walls of that room where it could not be ignored again. She had not raised her voice once. She had not argued. She had not needed to. Because power, real power, does not prove itself. It reveals itself. And once it does, everything else has no choice but to follow. Danielle did not rush toward the exit. She moved with the same measured pace she had carried from the moment she stepped into the room, as if nothing about her rhythm had ever been disrupted. The difference now was not in her movement. It was in the space around her. No one questioned her presence anymore. No one watched her with suspicion. They watched her with understanding. The kind that comes too late to change what already happened. As she passed the front desk, the junior banker straightened slightly, her voice quiet but clear. "Ma'am," she began, then paused, choosing her words carefully. "I am sorry for what happened." Danielle stopped, just for a second. Not long enough to create a scene. Just long enough to acknowledge the moment. She turned her head slightly, her expression calm, composed, but no longer distant. "You followed the system," she said softly. "Just make sure next time the system follows the truth." It was not a reprimand. It was not comfort. It was direction. The banker nodded, absorbing it fully, understanding that what she had witnessed today was not just an incident, but a standard. Danielle continued walking, her heels echoing lightly against the marble floor, each step reinforcing the shift that had already taken place. Behind her, the room did not return to conversation right away. It held on to the silence, not out of tension, but reflection. One of the security officers glanced toward the other, then toward the desk, then finally toward the space Danielle had just left, as if recalibrating his understanding of authority itself. Richard remained where he was, no longer at the center of anything, his presence now disconnected from the control he once carried so easily. No one approached him. No one needed to. The outcome had already been defined. Danielle reached the glass doors, the same entrance where, minutes earlier, her presence had been quietly questioned before it was openly challenged. She paused for a brief moment, her hand resting lightly against the door handle. Not hesitation, just awareness. She looked back once, not at any single person, but at the room as a whole. The polished surfaces, the stillness, the witnesses. Then she pushed the door open and stepped outside into the open air, where the tension of the building could not follow her. The city moved as it always did. Cars passed. People walked. Life continued, unaware of what had just unfolded behind those glass walls. Danielle took a slow breath, steady and grounded, then reached into her bag and pulled out her phone again. She tapped once. Carla answered immediately. "Everything is logged," Carla said. "Board has escalated the case to full review. Media risk assessment is underway. Danielle nodded slightly, though Carla could not see her. No media, Danielle said calmly. This is not for headlines. She paused, then added, this is for correction. Understood, Carla replied. Danielle lowered the phone, ending the call without hesitation. She stood there for a moment longer, not reflecting on what had happened, but recognizing what it meant. Because this was never about a single director, or a single decision, or even a single moment of bias. It was about a system that only worked when someone was willing to hold it accountable. Danielle adjusted her posture slightly, her expression returning to the same calm certainty she had carried from the beginning. Then she stepped forward, merging into the movement of the city, leaving behind a room that would never operate the same way again, not because she demanded it, but because she showed them exactly what happens when assumption meets reality and reality does not back down. The building behind her did not fade from importance just because she walked away. If anything, it grew heavier in meaning with every step she took down the sidewalk. Danielle did not look back again. She did not need to. Some moments do not require revisiting. They imprint themselves permanently, not just on people, but on systems. Inside that bank, conversations had already started again, but they were not the same. They were quieter, more deliberate, carrying a weight that had not existed before. Policies that once felt routine now felt exposed. Decisions that once felt automatic now demanded reflection. The junior banker remained at her station, but her posture had changed. Every screen she looked at now carried more than data. It carried responsibility. The security officers returned to their positions, but their presence no longer felt like silent authority. It felt like accountability. And Richard stood apart from all of it, no longer directing, no longer controlling, but standing in the space where consequence had finally reached him. Outside, Danielle moved through the city with the same calm precision she had shown inside. The noise of traffic, the rhythm of footsteps, the distant hum of everyday life all blended into a steady backdrop that did not compete with her thoughts. She did not replay what had happened. She did not need to. The outcome had already spoken clearly enough. Her phone remained silent now, the calls finished, the system already processing what had been set into motion. Somewhere, reports were being generated. Reviews were being escalated. Decisions were being made in rooms she did not need to enter. That was the difference between reaction and authority. She did not have to chase resolution. Resolution moved toward her. As she reached the corner, waiting briefly for the signal to change, a reflection caught her eye in the glass of a nearby building. For a moment, she saw herself not as the room had seen her when she walked in, but as she truly was. Composed, certain, unshaken. The signal changed. She stepped forward with the rest of the crowd, blending into the movement without losing any part of her presence. Behind her, inside the bank, something had shifted that would not easily return to what it had been. Training would be updated. Language would be reviewed. Decisions would be questioned before they were made. Not because someone told them to, but because they had seen what happens when they are not. Danielle continued walking, her pace steady, her focus forward. She did not carry anger with her. She did not carry the moment as a burden. She carried it as confirmation. Confirmation that silence, when backed by truth, is not weakness. It is precision. And precision, when applied at the right moment, does not just correct a situation. It redefines it. The city moved around her, unchanged, but somewhere behind her, inside a building that once questioned her presence, a new standard had already begun to take shape. Not written, not announced, but understood. And that understanding would outlast anything said in that room, because it was not built on words. It was built on what they had witnessed. And what they had witnessed could not be undone. By the time Danielle reached the next block, the moment had already moved beyond the walls where it began. Not louder, not public, but deeper. Inside the bank, the shift was no longer subtle. It had taken form. Systems that once operated quietly in the background were now being examined line by line, not because they failed technically, but because they had been used without question. The audit Danielle initiated did not stop at one decision. It expanded. It traced patterns. It connected moments that had previously stood alone, now revealing something larger, something harder to ignore. In a conference room upstairs, screens filled with timelines, flags, and authorization trails. Names appeared. Dates aligned. What once looked like isolated judgment calls began to form a consistent pattern of behavior. No one spoke loudly in that room. They did not need to. The data was speaking clearly enough. Richard sat at the far end of the table, no longer at the head, no longer directing the flow of information. His presence had shifted from authority to subject. Across from him, members of compliance and legal reviewed the logs in real time, their expressions focused, precise, untouched by emotion but guided by clarity. This was not procedural error, one of them said, not raising their voice, simply stating what the evidence had already confirmed. This was discretionary bias applied without verification. The words settled heavily, not as accusation, but as classification. And classification meant consequence. Back on the main floor, the junior banker watched as internal notifications updated across her screen. Training modules flagged for revision. Protocol guidelines marked for review. Language adjustments recommended. Not optional. Required. The environment she worked in just an hour ago was already becoming something else. Something more aware. Outside, Danielle continued moving forward, her pace unchanged, her presence steady within the flow of the city. She stopped briefly at a crosswalk, the red signal holding her in place for just a moment. Around her, people checked their phones, adjusted their bags, waited without thinking. But Danielle did not wait in the same way. She stood with intention, not paused, but positioned. Her phone vibrated once more. This time she looked at it. A single message from Carla. Initial findings confirmed. Board has approved immediate structural review across all branches. Danielle read it once, then locked the screen without response. No acknowledgement needed. The outcome spoke for itself. The signal turned green. She stepped forward again, merging seamlessly into motion, her focus never breaking. Because this was never about one location. It was never about one person. It was about a structure that only changed when someone forced it to see itself clearly. And now it had. Behind her, inside a building that once questioned her presence, decisions were being rewritten in real time. Not rewritten with noise or reaction, but with precision, with evidence, with accountability. Danielle did not look back because she did not need confirmation. She had already seen the moment turn. She had already heard the shift in tone, the change in language, the silence that followed truth. That was enough. As she continued down the street, the city carried on as if nothing had happened. But somewhere behind her, something had changed permanently. Not announced, not displayed, but embedded. And that is how real change works. It does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes, it arrives exactly like this. Quiet, controlled, and impossible to reverse. By the time Danielle reached the end of the block, the city had fully absorbed her again. But the moment she carried did not disappear into it. It settled into something quieter, something lasting. Not a memory to revisit, but a standard that would now follow her wherever she went. She slowed slightly as she approached a glass front building, catching her reflection once more, not to check her appearance, but to acknowledge the presence she had just carried through a space that tried to deny it. There was no visible change in her expression, no sign of victory, just clarity, the kind that does not need to be proven twice. Behind her, in that bank, the shift continued to ripple outward, not as disruption, but as correction. Meetings extended, reports expanded, language sharpened, and somewhere in that process, something deeper was being understood. Not instructed, understood. That the cost of assumption is not just a mistake. It is exposure. Danielle stepped forward again, her pace steady, her direction certain. Her phone remained silent now, not because nothing was happening, but because everything that needed to be set in motion already had been. She did not need updates to confirm impact. Impact had already revealed itself. As she reached the next intersection, she paused briefly, the light still red, the city holding her for just a moment longer. A man beside her glanced at his watch. A woman adjusted her bag. Life continued in small, ordinary ways. Danielle stood still, not impatient, not distracted, just present. Because presence, she knew, was not about being seen. It was about not being dismissed. The light changed. She stepped forward with the crowd, her movement blending into theirs without losing any of its weight. And as she crossed, one truth remained, not spoken, not announced, but fully realized. She had walked into a room where she was questioned, and walked out of it having redefined the way that room would question anyone again. Not through force, not through volume, but through precision, through control, through truth that did not bend. Danielle Brooks did not need to raise her voice to be heard. She became the standard that others would have to answer to. And somewhere behind her, in a place that once saw her as suspicious, a new understanding had taken hold, quiet but permanent. That dignity does not ask for recognition. It demands it by simply refusing to be anything less. And as the city moved around her, unchanged on the surface, one thing remained certain beneath it all. The next time someone like her walked into that space, the question would not be whether they belonged. The question would be whether the system was ready to meet them correctly. And that difference, quiet as it was, would change everything.